Thank you. Thank you very much, Kaylee. I greatly appreciate it. Is this mic okay? Are we working? All right. Well, I do greatly appreciate the chance to be here. So working with the Columbia Museum of Art, with Kaylee and Carrie and the whole CMA staff and docent corps here is always a treat. In our LEAF program, this coming fall will be the 10th year that we have collaborated on this program. And we bring third graders out and they're exploring the science of soils and weathering, erosion, and deposition. So they do science experiments. They also walk in their national park, your national park, our national park, right down the road from here. And then the art museum comes out and we do a hands-on art lesson. So the children are really seeing it, they're experiencing it, and then they're expressing it, which is fantastic. And I was delighted when Kaylee invited me to come give an art break talk here. So wandering through the collection, I'm not an artist by training. I did drawing and art when I was a child and then found other avenues, but it's kind of like coming back full circle at this point in life, working with the CMA and getting to come here and walking through the permanent collection. So what I have here is excuse me, what I have is a tail end of a cold, my apologies. But I have a presentation, so I'm going to pull some images that Kaylee has been kind to share with me. You all may recognize and know some of these images better than I do. And then I'm going to try and build a case that there are connections to birds all around us right here, Congaree National Park, in the Midlands of South Carolina, and to national parks in general. And look at some of the roles and ways that birds play in art and in life and in experience at parks. So the title here is A Ranger's Ramble on Birds, Bird Art in Connection to Parks. So first off, I would jump in. This is the 100-year centennial of your National Park Service. It has been 100 years since we've been formally founded, from Congaree National Park to Grand Canyon to the St. Louis Arch to the Statue of Liberty to Hawaii volcanoes to Denali to Everglades to Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Site, to Point Reyes National Seashore, and everywhere in between. These fabulous places really are our national parks. So as part of the National Park Service Centennial, we have a campaign that is Find Your Park. And this is encouragement, whether St. Gaudens is a park up in the Northeast that has a lot of art background and integrated background, but find your park. It doesn't have to be a national park, a state park. It's your world, your park's out there. So get out there and find your park. So along those themes for today's talk, I kind of pirated this. What is it? Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So today it's find your bird. And then another way to think about it is find your Columbia Museum of Art. So go up there and spend some time in the gallery. You know, as Kaylee and I walked through, I knew there was a lot, but it just kept coming. And it just kept coming. And I still don't have all the pieces that we talked about in this presentation. So, and then very lastly, for this part is find your BioBlitz. So as part of the celebration of the National Park Service Centennial, oh, thank you. We have an event coming up this weekend that is the BioBlitz. And this is the Wings Across South Carolina BioBlitz. This is a chance to get out and experience birds at your national parks. Congaree National Park, Fort Sumter, 96, Cowpens, and Kings Mountain are all hosting birds and bird-themed events. We're going for a festival-type atmosphere, but there's also citizen science data collection where we need feet and eyes to get out and help us count birds. You don't have to be an expert. We actually need people to come in and just help us. So point blank, the weather forecast is looking a little rough, but we're going to have a good time anyway. The show will go on, so come out and find your BioBlitz if you can join us this Friday and Saturday. We'd love to have you come join us. As I like to say, no matter what season you're at Congaree National Park, it's always one of the 4 best seasons to come to. So for real, that's good. But kind of turning to the subject at hand as far as outline and goals, I had to go with a silhouette for outline. Let's see, here we are. So one encouragement I would have for you is to think about birds. I can't say his name. There's the quote, and I'm absolutely blanking out. There's a quote who said, a French author who said, the true voyage of discovery lies not in finding new lands, but in seeing the world with new eyes. So sometimes when we go into a permanent collection or a park that we've been to many times before, we kind of focus in. It's not putting on blinders to exclude things, but it's trying to focus on a certain aspect. And I'll remember who that is in a minute. My apologies, folks. But also to appreciate birds and think about some of these bird connections and the roles birds play, and then creatively connect birds to Congaree National Parks in South Carolina. So this is a picture of a, I'm totally blanking, a chuckwill's widow, thank you very much. A chuckwill's widow, they are ground nesting birds. They sound kind of like a whippoorwill. So you hear them in the spring about now. I heard one a couple weeks ago. This is out at Congaree National Park. But when I was really thinking about bird depictions, I worked with Kaylee and we got all this great imagery. Oh, wait, I didn't mean to show that yet. We got all this great imagery, and I was really trying to think about how to organize it. And anybody here ever tried to organize something and you realize that there are multiple ways to organize it? Anybody ever experienced that? And there's not necessarily a right or a wrong one, but some of the things that I kind of, or what are some of the things about bird depictions, if you had to compare or contrast or think about organization that y'all might think about? Get a hand raised. Okay, so color, right off with art. So so color families. Size, so how big are the birds?
Realistic or abstract.
Yes, realistic or abstract, which might bring us also to what's the purpose and role of the bird? You know, or why are we depicting this bird? So I never did find a good single thread that would weave through, so I've got a couple categories that kind of help us organize. But some of the things that I came up with, as you all got at, are the birds symbolic or are they representational? Kind of, are they abstract or are they meant to be, this is a Bohemian waxwing, or this is a certain type of bird? Are they accurate or are they stylized? Sometimes you may have a very realistic looking bird, but is it a bird that we can track down and figure out what bird it was? Is it a whole bird or is it part of a bird? We're going to come back to that themes because there's sometimes you see birds and you don't realize it. And then historical and cultural context. As we look at the broad sweep of history and art history, what's the role of birds playing in there and how they're represented? And then what's the purpose, role, and status of the bird in the image? Is it a subject? Is it a character? Is it establishing a sense of place? What's it doing? And I just remembered our French author was Marcel Proust. Sorry, my apologies there. About the voyage of true discovery. Now, one thing, if folks want to, with that Marcel Proust quote, I often have children put on their owl eyes at leaf. This is a great way for focusing little hands. So if you take your thumb and your forefinger. So remember, the quote is, the voyage of discovery lies not in finding new worlds, but in seeing the world with new eyes. So if you take your thumb and forefinger, nobody hurt yourself, but if you put your eyes on, you put your elbows up to the ceiling, and you put your owl eyes on, you can do it this way, or you can do it this way. Get it all the way up. But this is great about third grade, or if you have grandchildren, nieces, nephews, this will keep, you know where the hands are, and you're focusing their attention. So classical motifs. This is the first little kind of block of ideas that I wanted to share. How many people have seen this item upstairs? Right when you walk in. So this is a red figure cotil from ancient Greece, and we have this owl right here staring at us. So Athena, symbol of Athens, Greece, and lo and behold, at Congaree National Park, we've got lots of owls. We actually have 3 different kinds of owls. This one here is a barred owl. It's separate than a barn owl. Barn ends with an N. And barred is like it has bars on its wings here, so it's known as a barred owl for these bars. And have you all ever heard the sound, the call that a barred owl makes? It sounds something like this. And some people will say it, who cooks for you, who cooks for y'all? So we remember that in the South. But the barred owl is very, very common at Congaree, and they'll actually come out to watch it during the day. And they'll just kind of sit and check it out. And so we do have these barred owls out here. We also have great horned owls and then the little screech owl, which I'm going to come back to the screech owl after a while. So another one, right in that first gallery, we have this Roman imperial period. It's a bowl, 2nd to 4th century, but we have this dove motif. And this is in the eastern part of the Roman Empire, what's quickly becoming the Byzantine Empire at that point, after Constantine moves the capital to Byzantium, or to Constantinople. These doves are playing roles in pagan pre-Christian imagery, but they're also playing a role in Christian imagery. You have the dove in the story of Noah and Noah's Ark, and then you have the dove in the story of the baptism of Jesus. And so you have this dove imagery there. So we see this, and they also have these egg motifs on the bowl, and there's not a whole lot of known about the exact context of this bowl. Now, we don't have, a lot of times in today's day and age, you'll see white dove releases at big events. A lot of those are actually homing pigeons. So doves and pigeons are related, and they're homing pigeons so that when they let them go, they go back to where they need to be. It's kind of like let them go, and they go back to where they go. Now, for years, many people have bred white doves in captivity. A true white dove, not a homing pigeon, but a white dove. Those don't fare so well if you release them. We don't have white doves at Congaree. Those would be, I think, a collared dove is the kind that people breed in captivity. But we do have, these are mourning doves, and we do have these mourning doves at Congaree. You'll hear them, and they have that kind of, it's spelled mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, so they have that kind of plaintive, sad, kind of this sadder type feel to the atmosphere. So we do have mourning doves at Congaree, so a connection there to ancient Rome. Here we have Frederick William, this is MacMonnies, who's an American artist, a young fawn with a heron. So this is still a classical motif. It may be more neoclassical because this is more kind of, I guess this is early 20th or late 19th century. But we have this heron here, the young fawn, and then the heron in the background. And lo and behold, we have great blue herons at Congaree National Park. This is a photograph taken by an intern. For several summers, we had interns from the Maryland Institute College of Art come down, and they would shadow with us in the summer and work on wildlife photography with us, and took some just fabulous photographs. This is another picture actually from some collaboration with the State Park Service, and this was shared by Al Hester, who is the Historic Sites Coordinator, and he shared this. This is actually an image from Hampton Plantation State Historic Site, but there's a quote that he shared from Caroline Rutledge, was the sister of Archibald Rutledge, who was a state poet laureate. And I was asking Al and some other folks in the State Park Service for images of birds and quotes kind of that captured the role of birds in South Carolina state parks. And he sent me this one, and the quote, this is from Caroline Rutledge in 1924. She said, "I see the giant live oaks here and there always seeming to be giving a benediction to the place. I see the river at the back of the house flowing so swiftly and so quietly, with the red bud of the maple dipping in the tide, and the red-winged blackbird darting to its nest in the rushes and giving its clear flute-like call. From my window I can see the white egret heron standing motionless on the farther side of the lake, in whose shining black water the reflection is perfect." I thought that was very well matched here with this image of the egret. Egrets and herons are in the same class of wading birds. And I have to say, I do know we have some birders that I will defer to technical aspects of birding to a few of the folks. If there are corrections, I welcome them. So this is another kind of neoclassical motif. And now I don't want to go too fast. Part of what I'm trying to do here is give you a little teaser. Encourage you to go back up to the gallery and look for some of these birds and connections. So I'm kind of popping off some of these connections kind of quickly here. But this is Evelyn Pickering de Morgan, and this is Eos, who is the goddess of the dawn in Greek mythology. And I also learned that this is one of Kaylee's favorite paintings upstairs. But right off we can see at her feet, at Eos' feet, we have this little brown bird there to zoom in. I don't know specifically what type of bird this is. I've worked with some birders at the park, been through some bird field guides. I can't track down anything specific. This may be an example of something that's stylized. I don't know. It certainly has to be meaningful if it's at her feet, but I have not been able to find out much in the research I've done. But we also have these beautiful seagulls flying around her. So we have this notion of the sun rising in the east, coming up over, this would be the Aegean Sea in Greece, or the Adriatic if we're thinking in Roman after kind of translation over to the Italian peninsula. But this is a picture of a seagull flying at Cumberland Island National Seashore off the coast of Georgia. So it's just kind of similar in feel, and I like, in the context of the whole piece it kind of gives us this open, airy sense of place. You can almost smell the salt water, but these birds, you can hear those seagull cries kind of echoing when you look at this, to stand there. So those are a couple examples of some classical and neoclassical motifs that I've kind of noticed up in the galleries. Turning to medieval and Renaissance Europe, there's a whole other suite of some beautiful items in the collection, as well as lots of collections to be made. So this is the Circle of Fra Bartolomeo, probably Mariotto Albertinelli, from 1474 to 1515. So this one's about 1510. But if you notice, right here, so we have the Virgin Mary and Christ, and we have this little bird right down here. And this is actually a goldfinch, and this is in Renaissance and medieval art as a symbol of Christ's passion. So if we zoom in on this goldfinch, notice the red head, the black part at the back of the neck, the black and yellow on the wing. Well, lo and behold, that is a European goldfinch. The artist did a pretty good job capturing that actual bird. So we have the black, with the head turn, you can't quite see the black on the back of the neck. You've got the red kind of coming over the front, and then you've got the yellow and the black. So in terms of detail, this artist knew what they were painting. But then we don't have, this is the European goldfinch. We don't have the European goldfinch at Congaree, but we do have this one. We do have the American goldfinch, which is found at the park. So it looks very, very different, but it's still a goldfinch. So there's a connection for you right there. This is another piece, and I didn't put this on an animation to show you. This is the Adoration of the Magi upstairs, oil on canvas from about 1484. And in the background, it's pretty dark. We have this peacock up here. And a peacock is a traditional medieval and Renaissance symbol of immortality. So the peacock, this big, beautiful bird, and it's back there. I'm going to show you one more peacock in a few minutes. Now, we do not have peacocks at Congaree, but they are in a group of birds, the Galliformis, which include turkeys. We're going to come to a turkey in a little bit. And they also include things like grouse and other game birds that we typically think of, and pheasants. So they're in that group. But as we think about pretty birds that really kind of catch your eye, this is a bird, this is a off of the web, but this is a bird that we used to have at Congaree that we no longer do. This is a Carolina parakeet. This is a plate from a John James Audubon collection, but we used to have parakeets that were native to the southeastern United States, far beyond Congaree as well, and the last one died over 100 years ago in captivity. They were a combination of changes to the landscape and hunting pressure for plumage for fancy hats, kind of spelled the end for the birds, but we still have this image of a parakeet. So just kind of in some ways contrasting the symbol of immortality with a bird that's no longer with us, but they're both birds that are beautiful and kind of catch your eye. So if we go over to the medieval Book of Hours here, we have this one that's open to different pages, but on this particular page we have another peacock here on the right, and we have a rooster over here on the left. Now, I do not know the exact significance of the rooster in this context. If we're obviously dealing with the New Testament around the time of the crucifixion, you have the quote about, before the cock crows 3 times, you will deny me, or before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. I don't know. If anybody knows, I would love to know more about that particular link to the rooster in medieval art. But if we're in Columbia, South Carolina, and we have a rooster, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Oh, yeah. USC, okay? Gamecocks. I'm not saying, I'm no direct connection, but you can't avoid it here. So we do have Gamecocks around us here in South Carolina. Roosters still live on in symbolism. So those are a few examples of some medieval and Renaissance motifs. And again, any of this that I'm tossing out, if you all know something else, like, hey, I know this other piece that explains this or whatever, please let me know. This is a first pass at this presentation for today, but I would love to see this grow and make some notes and run with it a little bit, kind of in the future. So turning to the next kind of genre, I wanted to look at daily life in the early modern to recent period. So these are several pieces that kind of fill in from the 15th, or really 16th century through the modern period in which birds factor in various forms into the pieces themselves. Here's one. So this is an imaginary landscape with Roman ruins in 1740. And I'm still a groupie for this stuff. So I learned from Kaylee that during this time period, a lot of wealthy Europeans would go on vacations. They didn't have iPhones and cameras. And so artists would paint these pieces. So these are all real places, but the artist would depict these so they're all smushed really close together. So it's kind of like a synthesis of your vacation. It's the montage. It's the scrapbooking done by a professional artist. But where do you see the birds in here? I thought about putting this one in the first section. Because when we take a world history course and we do everything kind of early history, ancient history, we also include Egypt. Right in here. So we've got birds involved in the hieroglyphics. Now, I'm not a linguist to get into the Rosetta Stone and break down all of this, and I don't even know that this artist was doing that at this time. I don't know what they were doing. This was pre-Napoleon, so they didn't have the Rosetta Stone in 1740. So, but we see these birds figuring in as kind of symbolic imagery. And certainly if you look at Egyptian mythology, you have Osiris, you have Ra, and you have various birds, eagles, ibis, very, very important there in the Nile River Valley. But thinking more broadly about the role of birds in language and symbology, that's the logo for Congaree National Park, and we've got this owl right down here. So it kind of captures that expression of Congaree. Now this is very stylized. We don't know. It's a barred owl. It's not a great horn because it doesn't have the horns, and it's but we have this owl here, which is part of our kind of graphic identity, just like we saw with the gamecock in USC. So birds as mascots, graphic identity, kind of symbols of communication, I thought was kind of a really neat connection here. Turning to another piece, this is a beautiful armoire, 1900 to 1910 by Louie Majorelle. Has anybody, y'all looked at this one? You see? So where are the birds? The birds are right up here at the top of the mirror. And if you notice, there's a cat and there's a bird, and then there are some grasshoppers or crickets down here. And I understand sometimes we use this as Gladys for the museum, to find Gladys in the armoire. Now, the images that I have don't blow up greatly, but we can see, now the caption identifies these as swallows. And one of the ways we know they're swallows, it really shows it better on the upper part. Their tails are forked. We get those long feathers coming off the outside of the tail. And we've got these little birds up there. They're small birds, and their wings are extended, and they're gliding. And this is actually a picture of a barn swallow. And if you notice, barn swallows, they've got these long forked tails. Now, these may be even a little bit more exaggerated in some sense than the ones we just saw. But barn swallows are found all over the world, including the United States. They are found nesting underneath the bridge. When you go to Congaree National Park, U.S. Highway 601, which runs down through St. Matthews over to Orangeburg, and you can catch I-26 there. There's some bridges over the Congaree River, and we actually have barn swallows that'll nest up under that bridge. But barn swallows are also found in France, where this armoire was made. So barn swallows are found all over the world. I don't know that this is the particular type of swallow that is depicted here, but if you look, I think, I looked through several images and types of swallows, and I didn't find any that had distinct colorations as far as the banding here and the banding here. My sense is that in this case, the woodworkers were trying to show off and show off in a good way. There's good pride too. Their skill with inlay, and they're just trying to build contrast. So the patterns, I'm not necessarily sure accurately depict a specific type of bird, but I am open to corrections. If someone knows, hey, that's a blah, blah, blah swallow, bring it on. But there's this swallow. Also learned it's interesting that there's a long tradition of sailors getting swallow tattoos. And this goes back evidently hundreds and potentially thousands of years, that swallows are one of those things that a seasoned sailor gets a swallow tattoo. And I don't quite, you can only do so much research on tattoos on a government computer. You just can, before you start getting shut down. So I didn't chase that one, but the swallows bear lots of symbology in other ways as well. So I love this one. This is actually one I pulled from our, as part of our LEAF programs in the fall, we have a pre-site lesson that the teachers can run before they come to the site, and their images from the permanent collection here. And they're invited to turn their classroom into an art museum for a day. And we're asking the children questions about landscapes, and the children at this point in art are doing foreground, middle ground, and background. And they're thinking about shapes, and I see some of our docents here who help teach those lessons nodding. And hopefully more of you could come join us if that's an interest and possibility. I know Kaylee and Carrie are always eager for that. But I love this one, and it doesn't have a bird in it. But you see this thing right here? When I first looked at this, I got to be honest, it looks kind of like some giant donkey. You see the head and the eye and the two ears? It looks kind of like a donkey at first, but it's actually a dead standing tree called a snag. And at Congaree, we have lots of snags. And snags are an important part. At Congaree, we have an old-growth forest. And an old-growth forest is not one where every tree is just immense and large, but it means that trees are allowed to live their full natural lifespan. Trees can die from insects and disease and lightning strikes and wind throw and competition from vines and other things, but trees at least have a chance. So about 11,000 acres of Congaree National Park, your national park, we have no historical record and no ecological evidence that they've ever been cut. So we have trees in all phases of their life cycle, from saplings on the ground to seedlings on the ground, saplings, immature trees, mature canopy trees, and then our old growth trees. Some of the cypress trees out there are probably 700 to 1,000 years old. And a walk on our boardwalk, which is ADA accessible, we've got plenty of benches and pullouts. Take your time, rest. It's wheelchair, stroller accessible. Get out there, you can see a big old loblolly pine tree that's about 255 years old currently. And then we have a big cypress tree out there. We don't have an exact date, but that one's probably 350-ish, 3 to 350. And there's some great stories here. But the snags are one of the things that make Congaree special as an old-growth forest. Because sometimes when we're with school kids, you walk around and you say, hey, look at the apartment complex. And they're all like, no, that snag is an apartment complex for mushrooms and invertebrates like beetles and for bacteria living up there. Sometimes we also call it the headquarters for the FBI, which are fungus, bacteria, and invertebrates. But where you have those beetles living in the tree, there's a special kind of bird that likes those, a woodpecker. So today at Congaree National Park, we have 7 species of woodpeckers, including this guy, kind of probably the inspiration for Woody Woodpecker, called the pileated or pileated woodpecker. And you can hear these calling. Pileated woodpeckers are distributed widely across North America. I hear them at my parents' house up in Greenville all the time. I hear them in Irmo, around my house up there. But there are a lot of them at Congaree. So we get these pileated woodpeckers. This is another pretty one it's actually a red-bellied woodpecker. It has a little reddish cast on its belly. There's another one called a true red-headed woodpecker, which has this big maroon. It looks like a cap all the way from its neck, all the way up except its beak is this brilliant maroon. If you'd gone back 100 years ago, if you'd gone back 30 years ago, we would have had another species of woodpecker at Congaree National Park called the red-cockaded woodpecker that likes to live in these old pine trees. Right now we don't have them at Congaree National Park anymore. They're federally endangered species, so there are relatively few of them left. They do have some living on Fort Jackson. We're doing some habitat management, trying to coax them back into Congaree National Park and give them a better chance. And those aren't down in the swamp, but in the uplands right around the visitor center. Those are the areas that those woodpeckers like. But if you've gone back 100 years, we would have had another kind of woodpecker called the ivory-billed woodpecker. This looks a lot like the pileated woodpecker, but this is a huge woodpecker. It's actually bigger than a pileated. It was known in Native American lore and tradition as the Lord God bird. So it's an absolutely beautiful bird. The last confirmed sighting of this bird in North America was in 1944 over in Louisiana. Several years ago, somebody claimed to see one over near the Mississippi River in the Cache River National Wildlife Refuge. And they got a grainy video, and scientists have been back and forth analyzing that video frame by frame, and kind of inconclusive. But we would have had these birds at Congaree National Park, certainly, 100 years ago. So, this is another one. This is from 1862, titled Fishing Village, and I love this one. Just the kind of sense of scale. Anybody here ever traveled to Alaska or Scandinavia and seen the fjords? Pretty impressive. It's a unique kind of landscape. So where are birds in here? This guy had chicken for lunch. She had eggs for breakfast. No, I'm kidding. But if you actually look right in here, now this image doesn't scale up nicely, but we have this little bird. And I think this is a beautiful example of using birds to establish this sense of place, this sense of airiness, and this vastness. You can see this bird flying way off, and the horizon's a long way past that. So that's pretty spectacular. Just kind of use of birds in the ambient environment to help us understand what's going on. And again, kind of coming back, this is the same image I showed you. That's seagulls at Cumberland Island, and off Fort Sumter, which is part of the National Park Service here in South Carolina, Fort Moultrie. Anybody been down to Fort Sumter, Fort Moultrie? Those are pretty cool places too. They're awesome. Beautiful spots there. I love Fort Moultrie, how it's done in several sections of American history, so you can see what it looked like, Revolutionary War, all the way up through World War II. So there's several different slices. This is another Dutch painting in the collection. This is from around the 1680s, called Landscape with Ducks and Roosters. And the caption, Dutch Baroque painter Melchior de Hondecoeter specialized in painting landscapes populated by beautiful birds. The animals in his painting seem to be acting out dramas or allegorical stories. Roosters also appear as troublemakers. There could be a hint about the rooster. I didn't catch that one on first read. Prone to picking fights. Here, the interaction between the rooster and the ducks seems to mimic human behavior. The rooster is talking to the ducks, perhaps warning them to stay away from his family, depicted in the background. That's kind of a neat story there. So one of the things that caught my eye when we look at this, we got this rooster, and come back to the Gamecocks now. We got the rooster there. Prone to picking fight. No, I'm kidding. But the other thing that caught my eye here was this bird up in the tree. Kind of in the upper left of the painting. And at first, when you see a big kind of crest on a bird like that, I immediately think, oh, it's some sort of a blue jay. So I start doing some research, and I discover it is not any sort of jay. But it is a bird called Bohemian waxwing. And look at the job this artist did of catching this. We've got the red splashes right here. We've got the red splashes, the dark lower portion of the wing. Up top, we've got this kind of black mass coming off the face. On this particular bird, the white is cutting all the way across to the bill. In our painting, at this resolution, we're not really distinguishing the bill. But this is a pretty accurate depiction of a Bohemian waxwing, which is a bird I found native to the area. And then when we look at ducks, I want to think about other roles of birds, but this is the 2016 duck stamp. And it's an interesting contrast. Duck stamps are required for waterfowl hunting, but did you all know where the funding or where the money that's involved in purchasing duck stamps goes? It goes to conservation. It goes to purchasing land for conservation for the public, and it goes to supporting the management of wildlife refuges at a state and federal level. So hunters in purchasing duck stamps are doing an awesome role in collectively supporting funding. There is no equivalent sort of tax or recompensation on, say, the purchase of binoculars that goes to funding similar types of conservation activities. Comes from purchase of duck stamps, as well as additional fees on firearms and archery tackle. That's where funding for national wildlife refuges that keep birds alive, that's where a lot of the funding comes from, a measurable portion. And as we think about ducks and hunting, we come up on this picture. So this is Benjamin Wilson, about 1777, and this is the Earl and Countess of Derby with Edward, their infant son and chaplain. But we have this child standing up here, and look what's in the child's hands. The bird. So we're hunting here. When the Earl of Derby, he's got his gun there beside him. And we focus in. I don't know exactly what kind of bird this is, but it's some member of the grouse family. And then I have another reflection. I talked about the State Park Service, and the fellow from the State Park Service sent me this picture of a robin, and this picture of a robin was taken at Rose Hill Plantation State Historic Site. And then the following quote I'm about to read you is from 1860, when a fellow named Henry Dexter traveled to Union County at that time. And he wrote in a diary or a journal, he said, quote, "One of the dishes on Mrs. William Henry Gist's table was robins, which Dexter could not relish, and of which he did not partake, for thinking of those that were so dear and pleasant to him along the pear trees in his own small garden at home." So this idea of birds as game and food plays an important role in history and culture. Very important role. I want to look at these two windows. So these are, Daniel Cottier was the designer. He was a Scottish designer, and these are approximately, 1874 to 1885. And these are meant to depict the 4 seasons. We don't have all 4, but we've got fall and we've got winter. If you notice on the top of those panels, we've got additional birds. So as we come across birds, I want to focus on winter first. We're going to go in reverse order. The shape and color, when you see a bird this shape and color, I showed this to some birders at the park, and they're, oh, that's a ptarmigan. It's a state bird of Alaska. In the winter, they get this stark white coat, so they're camouflaged. But when you look up pictures of ptarmigans, I was trying to find the species of ptarmigan. Most ptarmigans actually have black beaks, and their feet are feathered. And ptarmigans also roost very, very far north, like Arctic Circle and north. They're way up there. So if this fella's in Scotland, might not be working from an actual ptarmigan, might know, hey, they're white birds like this, but this is very closely related to partridges and grouse, which are common birds. They're common, used as food. So this is actually a picture of a ptarmigan. This is another Audubon print from one of the Audubon websites. But you can see those feathered feet. They have those very distinct feathered feet, which our bird here does not have. And these feet aren't webbed either. It's got that hooked beak. But a couple of the other, this is one of the ruffed grouse. There are a couple other this is a gray partridge, which is commonly used for game and food in that part of England. There are several other species it could be. But my sense is there was some artistic license here. He's kind of keeping with this, the light colors, knows there's a ptarmigan, it's a white bird, and kind of works it in that way. On the realm of the duck, ducks have been kept for many, 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 many years. They're not quite as prolific in producing meat and eggs as chickens are. That's why we have kind of, I think, deferred. We don't have duck fillet in our country. We have Chick-fil-A. But ducks have been kept for a long time. So I don't know exactly what species of duck there are. And a little bit of research I did, I found out there was a species of white duck called an Aylesbury, which was bred in the 17th century in Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire, England, for the London markets. Production of that particular breed of duck declined by the early 19th century, which would have been before this piece was produced, certainly, but could be an Aylesbury. It could be one of the Pekin ducks, which is more the domestic breed often kept in the United States that we see, based on, probably comes from a mallard duck, wild originally bred from. And if we're, a lot of ducks were kept in China, which is my link to the next one, which are snuff bottles. So in the gorgeous display of snuff bottles, many of the snuff bottles, here we have a white duck on the snuff bottle. Here we have some other birds. These may be something like a goldfinch. Certainly in China, I have no clue what species these would be. But there are some other ones that have this raven and then this kind of peacock image on the right. But what do Chinese snuff bottles have to do with South Carolina? Snuff is tobacco. Where is tobacco from? this is Oriental tobacco culture. South Carolina's, in Virginia, the Atlantic seaboard here is where kind of tobacco culture. We have tobacco culture and roots here. My grandfather was a tobacco farmer in Marion County. So we have tobacco kind of culture and roots here in the South. And then this is just a map of tobacco. This is from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but just shows flue-cured tobacco in 2014. So harvested acres by county. And we do still have some production in South Carolina. So it's still part of our economy. When you look back, it's been a huge part of our economy for many, many centuries. So which brings us in terms of Southern culture. I love this new piece, which I was delighted to hear has been acquired by the museum. I done old, I done tired, but I ain't no ways done, by Tyrone Jeeter. So this is 2013, and if you see, and to be fair, this image doesn't, I think, really capture it, but if you go upstairs, in her hair, do you see the raven? There's a bird up there. It comes out better in the actual piece upstairs, but it is a fantastic, it kind of catches you off guard that it's in her hair. And so yeah, in this, the caption says, bird imagery represents the spiritual expression of the end of life in the black tradition, where death is a kind of homecoming, much like a bird coming home to nest. So there's this kind of image of the bird there, captured there. I've got a few more here that I want to go through. I'm going to go through some of these kind of quick so we have a little bit of time for questions and answers here. But art is science. The museum has recently acquired, or has in their collection, some John James Audubon prints, which Audubon was paying very close attention to trying to depict the birds accurately. Few places things were rushed. Audubon actually did most of his art, as I understand it, from dead birds that were taxidermied. So he didn't always catch the poses quite as fresh and natural as they might be. But there are a couple here. And this is a turkey. We do have turkeys at Congaree. Now, we don't have this bird at Congaree, but I show you this visitor center. Anybody know where this is? It's not Disney World, same state, it's Everglades. So Flamingo, and Disney World probably has one, but this is actually Everglades National Park, the Flamingo Visitor Center. Now, one more piece. I was not able to get a picture, and I understand it's not on display right now, but if you wait, it will come back. There is a fantastic globe that was in the big center gallery, and that globe was a map, a star map. And it's 18th century, and that particular globe was mapping out the constellations, and several of the constellations are birds. So there you have this translation of birds as imagery and kind of our cultural memory of these maybe ancient stories that are pre-writing days, that's still how we remember the constellations and depict stars in space. So this is a picture of the night sky from Congaree National Park. And then, does anybody see the bird here? I love the bird. This picture couldn't be made without the bird. It's egg tempera paint. So egg tempera paint, the actual paint that this is made out of, is made out of egg tempera. So there we have a very practical use of birds. It's not directly in the depiction, but the painting couldn't happen without them. So, and the last section here, I won't belabor too long, but essentials and elements, I want to think about, so far we've looked at all pictures of whole birds, but what makes a bird a bird? What's unique to birds that's not a mammal, it's not a reptile? Feathers. Yes, so feathers. So this is a close-up. We were doing some bird banding. This bird was tagged or banded and released unharmed. It's a parula, but we have the scientists were looking at the feathers very carefully. So if we look at this picture from Charles Christian Heinrich Knoll upstairs, this is about 1865, buffalo hunt. Where's the bird? In the arrow, you got it. So boom, there we go. There's that bird in the arrow. Now, feathers are still organic, so they will decompose after a while, so we don't have a long record of, we don't have birds preserved in archaeological sites, but we have a long record of archaeological objects found at Congaree National Park, which speak to long-term occupation of this place we're now living for thousands and thousands of years. And exciting news, just last week in Florida, they announced a new discovery which pushes back the date for human occupation an additional 1,000 years before what archaeologists thought. It pushes back to about 14,400 years ago, the waning phases of the last ice age, and it makes us rethink our understanding of how Native Americans came to North America and established themselves. I'm not going to worry about this quote, it's for time's sake, but suffice it to say there's a long cultural history at Congaree. Now, where's the bird here? Yes, in the hat. So bird plumage is an important part of fashion. If we come back to, so there we got a close-up of the feather in the hat. If we come back to Eos and we look at her shoulders, she's kind of got these epaulettes. Now these are feathers, but they've got some sort of pearls or gold worked in as jewelry. So they are decoration on her outfit. So birds as adornment. And then if we back up and think a little bit more outside the box, where else do you notice birds in this one? Her wings. So as a goddess, or if we come, we see her wings. If we come back to this picture, the Giovanni di Marco del Ponte that's upstairs, look in that left-hand panel, and we have the Archangel Michael. So we looked. This is another example of a goldfinch. It's not necessarily accurately depicted here, but this is a medieval depiction of a goldfinch. But if you look at that left-hand panel, we have the angel with these wings. So these notions of birds and feathers, which for so long before the Wright brothers, and even after, I mean, we look to birds flying through the sky, and we marvel at what a freedom that must be, especially without having to go through TSA lines. But we look up at the sky, and we see these birds flying. And so birds, this imagery and kind of, religious iconography and mythology and tradition, birds come through. There's also a bronze vessel upstairs which has this griffin, which kind of mixes up our lion and our eagle, these two regal animals, and combines them into something bigger and better. But those feathers and the wings are really, really prominent, which give it that sense of freedom. So at the very end, you're invited to go upstairs and look for birds. Look for these connections. I had high hopes of making some sort of a bingo sheet to go find things. I have not gotten there yet, but Lord willing and the creek don't rise, I will work with Kaylee and Carrie to get something, certainly by this summer. It'd be a little fun activity, maybe grandkids, maybe friends. How many ways can you score together? Or how many ways can you score against yourself in an hour? But just looking for birds and bird connections up there. But in addition to being invited, so you're invited to find your park and find your birds and find your Columbia Museum of Art and find your BioBlitz. This weekend, if you can be around Friday and Saturday at Congaree or at Fort Sumter or at 96 up in Greenwood or at Cowpens up near Spartanburg or at Kings Mountain out near Rock Hill. So thank you all very much. I greatly appreciate it. And we've got a few minutes for questions or feedback. And any other feedback, again, even after this, I don't like to do programs just once. I like to do them and then revise them. And so if there's any interest or ideas or, hey, I've done some research on this and I got this, or you need to include this piece too, I'm all ears. So thank you all very much.